Hello everybody and welcome back to the second shelf and to another TBR video. And as you know, for the purpose of this video that I film at the end of each month or the beginning of a new month, TBR means new books to be released in the upcoming month. And for those of you who might be new, at the end of each month or the beginning of a month, I look at the upcoming new releases and then I pick a couple 4 or 5 books that I personally am looking forward to, find interesting, and then I share them with you. And I will have to start this video with a disclaimer, because I know The Mirror and the Light is coming out by Hilary Mantel, the 3rd book in the Thomas Cromwell series, in March, the 10th. But I won't talk about this book. I mean, I did just now, but it's not one of the books in my TBR. The Cromwell series is just not my thing. So if you wait for that, and that's the reason you want to watch this video, you can stop right there, because it's not one of my TBR March books. Instead, we start off with general fiction as usual. And those of you who know me, who know my taste, will not be surprised by my pick for general fiction, because Louise Erdrich's new book, The Night Watchman, comes out on the 3rd of March. I do this whole project in 2020 where I call it Author Spotlight, and I, together with Terry from Miss Terry Reads, we read all of Louise Erdrich's novels in chronological order. So in March we will read the 3rd one. And that also means that it will take me quite some time until I'll be able to read her latest, because they are still 10-something books in between me and that last one. Louise Erdrich, of course, is a Native American writer. She was born in 1955, and a lot of her work is about Native American life, Native American peoples, their experiences in modern-day America, but also in the past, and this one is no different. It is based on the life of Erdrich's grandfather, Thomas, who worked as a night watchman in a factory in the 1950s. And that is the same time that the infamous 1953 Emancipation Bill was about to be passed, which sounds very benign and positive, emancipation, but what it basically meant is that the bill wants to strip native tribes and native peoples from their land. There's also Patrice, who works in the factory where Thomas is the night watchman, and the family around them, who lives together in the reservation. I don't need to know more. I love Erdrich's work. The last 2 books that I read in this Author Spotlight were just fantastic. I don't know, Terry, I might cheat and read this book before we get to it and then reread it when we finally hit 2020. Just a possibility. But anyway, I'm greatly looking forward to this work, obviously. Next up is translated fiction. And it's a Dutch work. I don't think I've ever featured a translated Dutch work in my videos for some reason. Anyway, this is a debut novel from Marieke Lucas Reineveld, The Discomfort of Evening, translated from the Dutch by Michelle Hutchison, who happened to be one of my editors back in the days when I was still living in Holland. Anyway, the book comes out on the 19th of March, and Marieke Lucas Reineveld is an award-winning poet in Holland. She was born in 1991, so she is, probably only for me, but for me she's very, very young. And this is her first novel. It's set in Holland in a rural community, and you have your main protagonist, Jas, a young girl, teenage girl, I think, who one day makes quite a fatal decision to appeal to God when her older brother goes out on an ice skating trip. She pleads to God that the brother shouldn't return. And obviously he didn't. And then the novel follows the disintegration of this family after these events. The book came out in Holland in 2018. I've heard of it, but I haven't read it. So this is my opportunity to finally get to it, because it sounds interesting, and I'm always fascinated when poets switch genre and start to write fiction. And sometimes that works out beautifully, because they bring this specific poet language feel to a book. But it can also go wrong. I know that. But that's with all the books that I'm talking about. They just sound interesting, and I can never know whether they are really good, because I haven't read any of them. But you know that, right? So anyway, the Discomfort of Evening, I think I will, no, I'm sure that I will probably read it in the Dutch original, and then maybe look at the translation. But knowing Michelle Hutchison, I have every faith in her that the translation is beautiful. Next, we move to nonfiction, and I chose a memoir for this one, and that is Rebecca Solnit's book, Recollections of My Non-Existence, which comes out on the 10th of March. Rebecca Solnit is an American author born in San Francisco in 1961, essayist, memoirist, writing nonfiction, and I think most famous probably for her book, Men Explaining Things to Me. You know, the term mansplaining comes from her work. I don't think she invented it, but it comes from her work. I've read a couple of her essay collections. I have two more on my physical shelf to read. I find her often very interesting. It's not that I love everything she ever writes, certainly not all of her essays. I watched a couple of her interviews, talking, especially when she talks about the mansplaining thing. She can be really funny. She's very quiet, a very quiet person. But I'm interested in her life as a writer, and this new memoir, Recollections of My Non-Existence, tells about her life growing up in her early 20s. So it's the 1980s in San Francisco, becoming a writer, dealing with feminism, with gender issues. That sounds really fascinating to me. Emphasis to me. I love always books when writers tell me about how they became the writer they are. But I'm also interested in that time period in the 1980s, when things were getting violent at times. There was really a sort of, revolution is way too big a word, but there were big changes in the 1980s. So I'm looking forward to this memoir by Rebecca Solnit, and that was also the reason that I picked it for the nonfiction TBR for the March books. Next up is, of course, crime fiction. Always happy when I find a crime book coming out that I'm excited about, and this one is a debut book by Stephanie Robel, The Recovery of Rose Gold / Darling Rose Gold. So US and UK have different titles and different covers, as they do, because they both are English-speaking countries. So you have to distinguish yourself one way or the other, right? Anyway, and the book comes out on the 5th and 17th of March, respectively. You will find which title belongs to which country and the release date down below in the description box. I chose this one because I like the cover better and the title. The book, first the writer, Stephanie Robel, she was born in the US, did an MFA in writing and worked in advertising and copy editing, but she has been living in the UK for the past 3 years. The book is set around Rose Gold Watts, an 18-year-old young woman who has been sick for most of her life, but it turns out she wasn't really sick. It was her mother, Patty, who made her sick. Munchausen syndrome by proxy. You've probably heard of that. When somebody, mostly a caretaker, mother, parent, father, or some other caretaker, who makes the child sick in order to bring it to the hospital, and then the child has to be saved. So that's called Munchausen by proxy. And obviously Patty has Munchausen by proxy. Patty is sent to prison, and the book as I understood, it opens when, after her 5-year prison sentence, Patty is coming out and decides to live again with her daughter. And then the story takes off from there. It's a story about revenge. That's what I learned. So let's see what Rose Gold Watts and the mother Patty can come up with, revenge-wise. I picked this book, first of all, because it's a new author, a debut novel in crime. That's always exciting to me, but also because this whole Münchhausen by proxy thing has long fascinated me. The idea, the motivation of a caretaker to make the child you take care of, mostly your own child, to make that child sick in order to get attention from the hospital and then be the savior. It's something that I think is so off, but still so fascinating, that when I read this blurb and that the book is about that, or at least that the premise, the context of the book is a woman suffering from Münchhausen by proxy and the daughter who had to endure the Münchhausen by proxy, I was sold. I was sold immediately. So the recovery of Rose Gold, or Darling Rose Gold, coming out in March, looking very much forward to it. And as always, we end the TBR with sci-fi or fantasy. And this time it's fantasy, and also no surprise that I picked N.K. Jemisin's new book, The City We Became, which comes out at the end of the month and is the first in a new fantasy trilogy, Great Cities. If you're following me, you know how much I loved N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth series. It's one of the few fantasy books that really spoke to me, the kind of fantasy that I love. You might know I always try to get into fantasy, but most of it is just not me. I don't like a knight's world, R.R. Martin. That's just not my thing. But N.K. Jemisin and the Broken Earth series I thought was fantastic, all 3 books of them. So, of course, I have to feature her new one in the March TBR. The City We Became is set in New York City, and as far as I understand it, it's a sort of a multiverse, contemporary New York City, but a multiverse, so not a fantasy world, but an existing city. And if you follow N.K. Jemisin on Twitter, you will have seen that she says this series is an answer to Lovecraft, that she thinks his view on New York is very Gotham-like and very negative, and that she wanted to present a book with a positive look on New York. I don't know much about the story. There's not much told when you read blurbs or people who talk about the book, other than that obviously New York and its boroughs are characters, the city we became, and that it is the usual N.K. Jemisin mixture of mythology, fantasy, witchcrafty things, and it's set in New York, and it's about New York, and New York is a character. I mean, what more do you want to know about a book? And it's by N.K. Jemisin. Anyway, I'm just saying, can you tell I'm excited? You can probably tell. Anyway, N.K. Jemisin's first book in her new series is my sci-fi fantasy pick for the March TBR. And that was it for the books that I'm excited about that will be published in the next month, March. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know whether any of the books that I featured are also of your interest, or whether you are especially excited about a March release that I haven't mentioned. And no, don't tell me about Hilary Mantel. I know that. But maybe some other book that comes out in March that you want to tell me about and recommend to me. That was it. I said that already. I thanked you. I hope that you liked the video. I'm looking forward to your comments, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.